Today we commemorate the annual United Nations Day, which marks the anniversary of the UN Charter coming into force on October 24, 1945. On that day, 78 years ago, the UN officially came into being. The UN Charter, written in the aftermath of a ruinous Second World War, begins with the famous words, quote, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind." End quote. In 2023, our collective resolve is being tested like never before, with the scourge of war affecting millions of people in places like Ukraine, Palestine, Israel, Sudan, and Myanmar. In this part of the world, West Africa, we are witnessing military removing elected leaders, most recently in Niger. Now more than ever, all member states must recommit to the values of the UN Charter, and we must collectively renew our push for peace. Our Secretary General Antonio Guterres said this week, I quote, "The United Nations is a reflection of the world as it is, and an aspiration of the world we know it can be." End quote. Our organization's aspirations remain the same as in 1945, namely to secure peace and prosperity for all people everywhere. United Nations personnel around the globe strive to work with governments and many others to translate this vision into reality every day, including here in Nigeria. I would like to salute the courageous and impactful work of my UN colleagues in Nigeria, who regularly face dangers and risks in the course of their duties, not just in the Northeast, but across the country. Today is also a good moment to again honor the 23 UN staff and civilians killed during the horrendous 2011 terror attack on UN House here in Abuja. And as I speak to you, courageous UN colleagues working to protect vulnerable people in the wars and conflicts I mentioned earlier are paying the ultimate price. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. And we can best honor them by letting them inspire us to continue the work of the UN. Now, all 21 active UN agencies in Nigeria share a common principle underpinning the 2030 Agenda and the related SDGs, namely to leave no one behind. We will together prioritize efforts that reach the almost 20 million children out of school, the 25 million people facing food and nutrition insecurity, and the 16.5 million women and girls experiencing violence, as well as those most vulnerable among older people and people with disabilities. Others we must not leave behind include slum dwellers, refugees, and those internally displaced by violence carried out by insurgents, bandits, criminals, and some among farmer and herder communities, as well as traffickers. Following a successful SDG summit in New York last month, we are looking to federal and state government leaders and others from all walks of life to accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda with support of the United Nations. In traveling around the country, I have myself seen firsthand the incredible entrepreneurial spirit of countless Nigerians and the enormous potential for Nigeria to develop and to feed itself. But as a prominent Nigerian once told me, you cannot eat potential. We must all work yet harder to turn the possible into actual reality. This year's United Nations Day theme, UN cooperation with Nigeria to achieve the SDGs, underscores the importance of collaboration and shared responsibility to build a better world for all. Included in the Cooperation Framework for Sustainable Development, covering 2023 to 2027, which we in the UN and the federal government jointly signed last December, are several transformative initiatives that move beyond the business-as-usual approach towards high-impact action which will move the needle. These catalytic initiatives are building on the good work UN agencies are already supporting in Nigeria. There are plenty of examples of the UN assisting to provide especially young people decent employment and livelihood opportunities. A second example is strengthen food systems, involving in particular agricultural producers in rural areas. A third example is to give children quality learning opportunities. Fourthly, to increase access to primary health care and to protect women and girls from violence. And finally, to strengthen public institutions and services, not least to make them more accountable and transparent. Much effort is also going into mobilizing substantial financial resources to end the epidemics of AIDS, TB, and malaria, to strengthen the country's peace-building architecture, to develop conflict management capabilities in Katsina and Kaduna states, to support the process of those exiting from insurgency groups in Borno State, and to enhance the internal and external oversight mechanisms for the Nigerian police force in Kano and here in the FCT. We should also not forget our humanitarian work, notably in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, where food, clean water, shelter, and other urgent assistance has been provided to 3.6 million vulnerable people in the first half of this year. This year's commemoration of 75 years since the Universal Human Rights Declaration reminds us that all our development work must be underpinned by ensuring the human rights of all citizens are fully respected. In advocating for the right to free expression, we must also counter worrying instances of hate speech and demonizing those whose actions and views we disagree with. In closing, as we mark this UN Day, let's unite behind the ideals and values of the United Nations. Together, that is government, civil society, private sector, the media, and the United Nations. Together we can live up to their promise for people, planet, prosperity, and peace. I thank you.